A phone rings at a Social Security office. An elderly caller wants to change his direct deposit. Simple request. He's done it before. But this time, the call gets rejected. Not by a person, by a new system. No verification through phone anymore. That door just closed. Somewhere behind the scenes, the government made a decision. Quietly. Not with a press conference, with a policy memo. Tens of thousands of fraudulent claims a year, millions of dollars stolen through a simple phone call. So they shut the door. Now, if you want to change your bank information, you need to prove who you are differently online with two factor verification or in person at an office. For millions of seniors, that sounds simple. For millions of others, it's a serious problem. No internet access, no nearby office, no way to get there. This is the story of a security fix that protected some people and left others stranded. Stay with me. For decades, it was simple. You called Social Security. You answered a few questions: your name, your date of birth, maybe your mother's maiden name. If it matched, you were verified. Want to update your bank account for direct deposit? Done. Over the phone. No office visit, no paperwork mailed in, just a voice on the line and a form filled out on the other end. For an older generation who grew up trusting the phone system, this felt normal. It felt safe. But somewhere along the way, that trust became a weakness. Because the same simple process that helped seniors also helped criminals. All the scammer needed was a few pieces of stolen information: a name, a birth date, a social security number, often bought off the dark web for a few dollars. With that, they could call in, pretend to be the beneficiary, and redirect the monthly check straight into an account they controlled. By the time the real recipient noticed their payment never arrived, the money was already gone. Internal data started painting a troubling picture. Roughly 70,000 phone based claims and change requests flagged for fraud concerns every single year. Some of it caught in time, a lot of it not. Officials later put a number on the losses: over $100 million a year lost to direct deposit fraud alone. Not hypothetical, not a rounding error. Real checks meant for real people disappearing into accounts that were never theirs. Something had to change. And in 2025, it did. The Social Security Administration announced it was closing the easiest door scammers had been using for years: phone only identity verification, gone. If you wanted to change your direct deposit information or verify your identity for a new claim, you now had two options: log in through the agency's secure online portal using two factor authentication, or show up in person at a field office with valid identification. No more doing it entirely over the phone. On paper, it sounded like a clean fix, a door closed on fraud. But for a large portion of the people this system was built to protect, that same door being locked created a very different problem. The logic behind the change made sense on a spreadsheet: close the vulnerable channel, force stronger verification, cut off the criminals. But policies don't just live on spreadsheets. They land on real people, in real situations, all across the country. Start with the online option. Log in with two factor authentication. Simple if you already have a smartphone, a stable internet connection, and some comfort navigating a government website. Now picture a man in his 80s, living alone in a rural county. No smartphone, no home internet. The nearest library with public computers is 40 minutes away. For him, log in online isn't an inconvenience. It's a locked door. So that leaves the second option: visit a field office in person. Sounds reasonable until you look at where those offices actually are. Advocacy groups tracking the issue raised early warnings: rural seniors, people with mobility limitations, beneficiaries with disabilities that make travel difficult or impossible. For them, an in person visit isn't a quick errand. It's a logistical challenge that can take an entire day, a ride from a family member, or a costly trip they can't easily afford. And here's where the timing gets uncomfortable. At the same moment this stricter verification rule was rolling out, the agency was also closing offices, consolidating locations, reducing staff, which meant that for some seniors, the nearby field office wasn't nearby at all anymore. Some found themselves an hour or more away from the closest location that could verify their identity in person. Retiree advocates spoke up quickly. They warned that a policy meant to protect beneficiaries could end up harming the very people least equipped to adapt. Not because the intention was wrong. The intention was sound. Fraud is real, and it does real damage. But the execution created a new kind of casualty. Not victims of scammers this time, victims of a security system they couldn't physically or digitally access. A man who's received the same monthly check for 15 years suddenly finds himself needing to prove, in a new and unfamiliar way, that he is who he's always been. And if he can't get through the process in time, the consequence isn't hypothetical. It's a missed payment, rent unpaid, a prescription not picked up, a problem created by a fix meant to prevent exactly that kind of harm. To really understand why the agency was willing to accept this trade off, you have to look at how the fraud actually worked. It wasn't complicated. That was the problem. Scammers didn't need to hack anything. They didn't need advanced software or inside access. They just needed information that was already floating around: name, birth dates, social security numbers, harvested from data breaches that had nothing to do with the agency itself. A retailer gets hacked. A healthcare provider gets hacked. A credit bureau gets hacked. Millions of records leak onto the dark web, sold in bulk for pennies per person. From there, a caller just needed to sound convincing, confirm a name, confirm a birth date, answer a security question pulled from public records or old data leaks. And just like that, a stranger could redirect someone else's social security check to a brand new bank account. Investigators found a pattern. Close to 40% of direct deposit fraud cases traced back to phone calls where someone impersonated the actual beneficiary. It wasn't a handful of isolated incidents. It was a method, repeated, refined, and increasingly automated. Some scammers targeted people who had passed away, exploiting delays in updating records. Others targeted living beneficiaries directly, counting on the fact that many wouldn't notice a missing payment right away, especially if they lived alone or didn't check their accounts often. By the time a victim realized something was wrong, the money had usually already moved. Once funds hit an outside account, tracing and recovering them became a slow, difficult process. Sometimes successful, often not. For an agency responsible for issuing payments to tens of millions of Americans every month, a vulnerability like this wasn't just a technical flaw, it was a financial hemorrhage repeating year after year. So officials made a calculated decision: shut down the weakest link, even if it meant creating friction for legitimate beneficiaries. The acting commissioner at the time put it plainly to reporters. The agency was losing over $100 million annually to this exact kind of fraud. Something had to give. And in security, the trade off is almost always the same. Tighten the door enough to keep out bad actors, and you inevitably slow down some of the people who were never a threat to begin with. The question wasn't whether there would be a cost, it was who would end up paying it. For most working age Americans, this change barely registers. Log into an app, confirm a code sent to your phone, done in under a minute. But that assumption that everyone has a smartphone and comfort using it is exactly where this policy runs into trouble. Consider a widower in his late 70s. He's never owned a smartphone. His late wife handled most of the household's technology. Now he's alone, staring at a letter from Social Security telling him his identity needs to be verified through a system he doesn't understand. He calls the toll-free number, hoping someone can walk him through it over the phone. But the phone-only path for changes and verification has narrowed. He's told he needs to either complete it online or visit an office in person. His daughter lives 2 states away. His neighbor offers to drive him, but the appointment wait time stretches out for weeks. In the meantime, his payment status sits in limbo. Not lost, not stolen, just stuck, tangled in a verification process built to stop criminals, but not built with him in mind. Legal aid workers and senior advocacy groups began collecting stories like this almost immediately after the rollout. Not fraud victims, verification victims. People who did everything right and still found themselves caught in a system slower and less forgiving than the one it replaced. The agency did leave a few paths open. For those who can't reasonably access online verification or a field office, waivers exist. Exceptions for people in remote areas without nearby financial institutions. Exceptions tied to documented health or mental health challenges. But applying for an exception is its own process. Paperwork, documentation, time most people don't expect to spend just to keep receiving a payment they've relied on for years. Financial counselors who work directly with seniors started offering a specific piece of advice once the change took hold. Set up your online account now, before you actually need to use it in an emergency. Don't wait until a deposit fails or a claim needs updating. Get familiar with the login process while there's no pressure and no ticking clock. For those without any digital access at all, the advice shifts. Find your nearest field office today, not the day you need it, because appointment backlogs don't wait for a crisis to clear themselves. The system was rebuilt to stop thieves. It succeeded, at least on that front. But for a portion of the population it serves, that success came with a quiet cost still being measured. Zoom out, and this isn't really a story about one policy change. It's a story about a system built in one era, trying to defend itself in another. Social Security was designed decades ago, when a phone call and a few personal details were enough to prove who you were. Back then, that information wasn't sitting in stolen databases, traded in bulk online. Today, it is. Nearly everyone's basic identifying details, name, birth date, social security number, have likely been exposed in some breach somewhere, whether they know it or not. That single fact changed the entire security equation. The old verification method wasn't broken because people got careless. It was broken because the information it relied on stopped being private. Once that happened, phone verification wasn't a safeguard anymore. It was an open door with a welcome mat. Closing it was probably inevitable. Most security experts agree the fraud numbers left the agency with little choice. But the way it closed, quickly, without a fully built out safety net for people who couldn't adapt overnight, is where the real debate lives. Advocacy groups aren't asking the agency to reopen the vulnerable phone system. Nobody wants a return to 70,000 flagged fraud cases a year. What they're asking for is something more specific. Better support during the transition. More field offices, not fewer, especially in rural areas. Clearer guidance mailed directly to beneficiaries who might not check email or browse government websites. Faster processing for the exceptions that already exist on paper. Some of these changes are already being discussed inside the agency. Others remain proposals, competing for attention alongside dozens of other priorities. In the meantime, the policy stands as it is: a stronger wall against fraud, a taller hurdle for a portion of the people it protects. And for every senior currently receiving a Social Security check, the practical takeaway isn't complicated, even if the policy behind it is. Know how you'd verify your identity if you ever needed to. Set up the tools now while there's no emergency forcing your hand. Because the door that used to be open, the easy phone call that solved everything, isn't coming back. The scammers didn't win this round, but they changed the rules for everyone else in the process. A system built to protect seniors from theft now asks something new of them in return: proof, delivered in a format not everyone finds easy to give. Somewhere between stopping fraud and serving the public, a balance is still being worked out. For now, the safest move isn't to wait and see. It's to check your own verification status today, before a letter forces the question for you. Because in this system, being right isn't enough. You also have to be ready to prove it.